You're watching Scriptease. In today's episode, we'll be breaking down the opening scenes from American Beauty. You can expect spoilers for the entire film, mature language, and adult themes. When people ask me what my favorite movie is, American Beauty is my go-to answer. Thing is though, I'm not certain it is my favorite movie. I can remember movies that made me more emotional, movies that I had a better cinema-going experience with, movies that gave me grander revelations about the human condition. But still, when asked, I say American Beauty, and I don't know why. It could be the great dialogue, or the on-note yet over-the-top performances, or that deliberating score. But ultimately, if I had to pick just one thing, I think it'd be this: the symmetry. There's an incredible precision in the layout of the scenes, where each moment has a correlating moment later on, and by comparing and contrasting the two scenes, we can see both character growth and thematic progression. As we step through the opening pages of this screenplay, I'll point out these little moments, and you'll see just how cohesive the film truly is. The script begins with a kind of teaser section in which Jane and Ricky discuss killing Lester.
Someone really should just put him out of his misery.
We find out later when this scene is repeated that this is just an off-color joke, but already we have this idea of symmetry popping up. At this point, it's a dark moment of intrigue that hooks the viewer in. But later, this scene is a joke, a sign of comfortability and confidentiality between Ricky and Jane, a clear indication of their budding love. I will say that I'm almost universally not a fan of dropping in a scene from later in the movie at the start just to hook in the viewer. That how did we get here trick is super shallow to me, and it's often just a crutch that stories with boring openings lean on. Now I can see why it was included here for two reasons. Firstly, this is a movie about suburbia. The first act is spent establishing an ordinary family dynamic, and it may have worried the director or producers that viewers would tune out in those opening 10 or so minutes. I don't agree with this at all. The opening minutes of American Beauty, even with teaser excluded, are some of the most engaging moments of the film in my opinion. The second and more probable reason for this teaser's inclusion is the original premise of the film. American Beauty was originally much more of a crime drama, with Jane and Ricky being falsely convicted of Lester's murder based on this exact piece of footage. In fact, the original screenplay had about 5 pages at the start of the script, with a courtroom scene, news reports, and police interviews about Lester's death. My guess is the inclusion of Ricky's tape at the beginning here is mostly a relic of this original idea. It's hard for me to remember the first time I watched American Beauty. Maybe that teaser really did draw me in. Maybe I really was intrigued by who killed Lester. But now, I don't really think of American Beauty as a crime drama. Still, the case can be made that for a first-time viewer, this teaser is an essential hook. I like the dialogue here.
Not some horny geek boy who's gonna spray his shorts whenever I bring a girlfriend home from school.
The dialogue here smacks of 90s speech, a great intro into the story. The camcorder footage is also an interesting device, providing that first moment that jars the audience out of their stupor. Where my interest lies though is the real opening sequence, a morning in the life of Lester. The morning in the life of intro is pretty cliched, but you know what? It works. We get very specific shot calling here without any mention of the camera. We're flying above suburban America, descending slowly towards a tree-lined street. Once again, in the original script, this is slightly different. We actually see Lester flying over the street in a dream sequence. This idea has been removed, but the idea of dreams and fantasies still remains very much intact. I mention it because every time we have this sweeping camera motion, it's immediately followed by Lester's morning routine. Except, of course, at the end of the film, when Lester dies, and the camera instead retreats back away from the street. Once again, this little motif ties the film together nicely, while also having a thematic importance. Lester's journey involves turning his dreams and fantasies into reality. His flying through suburbia is a need for freedom from his stagnated marriage, and his sex fantasies are, well, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Another thing I want to point out here is the phrase suburban America. It's not typical suburbia or a regular American suburb. Adding those adjectives would accentuate the wrong part of the image. It makes the setting feel boring, ordinary. What you want instead is to create a series of quick associations in the reader's mind. The very fact that suburban America is such a familiar image to viewers makes it super accessible and saves exposition. Compare this to something like Star Wars or Avatar, big fantasy and sci-fi films with whole new systems and cultures to understand before you can really get invested in the plot and the characters. So don't think typical, regular, or standard, think familiar, and take advantage of that to get into your story faster. Over this opening sequence we have narration, that dreaded double-edged sword that invokes the ire of many a film critic. As we've spoken about in the past, you'd want to have a very good reason for including narration in your script, since you're telling rather than showing. Here, Lester's narration provides us with an important detail right off the bat.
In less than a year, I'll be dead.
We're about to watch a man go through a midlife crisis and emerge more mature on the other end, but all of this is undercut by the knowledge that he's going to die. This frames his journey in an entirely different context. What's the point if he's just gonna die anyway? Why should I care if Lester succeeds or fails if his outcome is already set? And why does he sound so calm about dying? Of course, Alan Ball, the screenwriter, is already one step ahead of us. Lester comes off as though he himself can't really explain why he should care either.
And in a way, I'm dead already.
Of course, this is backed by the action text as well. An irritating alarm clock rings. He rolls over, looks up at us and sighs. And yet this juxtaposition of Lester's inevitable fate with the painful ordinariness of his middle age is exactly what keeps us interested. The rest of the opening sequence follows the classic screenwriting wisdom of establishing the status quo. What does our protagonist's life look like? In this case, why is Lester so bored with his life? And that starts with introducing Lester's wife, Carolyn. I love this first image of Carolyn. Close on a single dewy American Beauty rose. A gloved hand with clippers appears and snips the flower off. The American Beauty rose is a symbol of passion throughout the film, most clearly seen in the fantasy sequences with Angela. So when we see Carolyn cut one off as her first action, it's clear that she is the main constrictor of this passion. Lester's happiness is stifled by Carolyn's obsessive need for perfection.
In order to be successful, one must project an image of success at all times.
This close-up of the rose being snipped off really drives home the violent nature of the act, and it's probably no coincidence that this image immediately follows Lester masturbating in the shower. Youch! Also worth noting the gloved hand here. We won't see another gloved hand until the end of the film, when the Colonel returns home, covered in blood after killing Lester, the blood that same shade of crimson as the rose. Now we see Carolyn gardening and observe what appears to be a perfectly ordinary little interaction between her and the Jims. Quaint even. Once again though, Lester's narration undercuts the scene.
See the way the handle on those pruning shears matches her gardening clogs? That's not an accident.
There's always been something uncanny about things that are too perfect. Maybe it's some ancient part of our brain meant to detect lies told through smiling masks. I really don't know. But the idea pops up time and time again in films with this false suburban veneer. Pleasantville, The Truman Show, Chumbucket, and so on and so on. I think American Beauty probably gets its inspiration for this scene from the opening scene to Blue Velvet. In Blue Velvet, David Lynch uses the burrowing and chattering of insects in the dirt to symbolize the darkness beneath the surface. But here we don't see how false the appearances are until later on. Instead, this is simply hinted at by Lester.
She wasn't always like this. She used to be happy. We used to be happy.
We should talk a bit more here about how exactly Carolyn's fake personality is conveyed in this scene. In the script, it's quite obvious, with a couple lines that direct the actor. The overly friendly parenthetical, for example, probably wouldn't be needed later in the script once we've gotten to know Carolyn better, but it's essential here. As is this simile. She's overly animated, like a TV talk show host. Without these little touches here, Carolyn could seem like a lovely person, tending to her garden and making polite chit-chat with the neighbors. And then it would seem almost rude when Lester says she used to be happy. Props to Annette Bening for conveying this so well in the film. Jane's introduction is short and to the point. We still have that recurring theme of appearances, hidden desires and insecurities, as we see from Jane looking at the plastic surgery side. It's worth noting here that we do actually see the word typical, but there's a key reason it's different. It's in the narration, not the action text. Lester, referring to Jane as a pretty typical teenager, is giving his view on Jane, not an omniscient view of her. This is particularly striking since the audience has a totally different impression of her based on the teaser scene. I also like the formatting here of Lester's narration, where the narration is cut off by a sound effect in the action text, and then the key line is delivered.
I wish I could tell her that's all going to pass, but I don't want to lie to her.
Once we've introduced all the ingredients, we get a little scene to establish the family dynamic. Carolyn rules over the family with her sarcastic, mocking tone. Since she's so preoccupied with appearances, she directs her criticism towards Jane quite bluntly.
Jane, honey, are you trying to look unattractive?
Lester comes off as hopeless, pathetic, spilling the contents of his briefcase in an almost slapstick manner. Even worse, he's embraced this role in the family. Lester smiles sheepishly, trying to lighten the moment. His point of view. Carolyn looks down at us, contemptuous but also bored, as if she gave up expecting anything more long ago. This look gets referred to later on, when Carolyn attempts to chastise Lester for buying the Firebird. It's that same look she had at the beginning, when he dropped his briefcase, but whatever power that look had is gone. Lester just laughs. Again, the symmetry in this film is beautiful, in this case demonstrating how far Lester has come in freeing himself of Carolyn's grip. Lester ends his narration on this note.
I have lost something, but you know what? It's never too late to get it back.
The narration here clearly sets Lester's goal, and having a clear goal is essential to keeping the viewer interested. But more importantly, it reassures the audience that Lester won't be staying as this loser for too long. After all, who wants to watch a film with a loser as the protagonist? In just 5 pages of screenplay, we've established the 3 major characters, the setting, the tone, the key theme of the film, and the protagonist's need. There's drama, there's comedy, there's interpersonal conflict, there's a relatable protagonist, there's nudity. I mean, what more can you ask for? Oh, I know. How about a collection of moments that pay off later in the film and on rewatches? Yeah, the opening sequence of American Beauty kinda rocks. There's so much more I want to say about this movie and its script, but maybe that's best saved for another time. Good writing and good luck.